Hey, good evening, everyone. Dave Wilson of the Ring of Hire Show. Hey, listen, I got a favorite guest of mine and an author here, Paul Falcone. How you doing, Paul?
Good, Dave. Great to be here.
Good. And we're going to deep dive right into some of his books. This is my favorite one, 101 Tough Conversations to Have an Employee. So be right back after this. How do you like those videos, Paul?
Got my attention. That is for sure.
Very
cool.
Whew. Paul, could you start off and just introduce yourself and what you do and tell us? I'm very interested to learn more about you.
Yeah, no, that's nice to say, Dave. I'm a human resources practitioner by trade, right? I had great jobs. I was head of HR for Nickelodeon, head of international HR for Paramount Pictures, both on the healthcare biotech side and in entertainment. That's primarily the combo. Got into writing because I went to grad school, didn't become a professor, but always loved the idea of getting published. And I've been blessed. It's worked well for me. So I write for SHRM.org, the Society for Human Resource Management. And I've written now 10 books, but I've got 5 more coming out next year as a set. So that'll bring me up to the whopping 15. So I'm really happy about that.
Well, I was going to ask you, I got a lot of people chiming in, and everybody, please feel free to ask questions. Ken, Stephen, I know you've got a lot of questions. But I was going to ask you, because now I'm going to show you, everybody. This is the book that I loved. So then I got your 96.
Wow.
I got your 26.
Holy cow.
I got your hiring and firing. And this, I'll tell you what, I got a lot of shows to do, Paul.
And everything you have in your hand, which is so cool, Dave, is translated, including that big one on the 101 sample write-ups. I have it in Chinese. I mean, it blows my mind to think that this stuff is spreading all over the world. It's a really cool feeling as an author.
It is. And when I told you, the reason and everybody knows when I did the first show, Paul, that this resonated with me, and I told you, is because I've been there. I told you right out of the military, I was young, and at the paper factory, you didn't have this. It was a union environment.
Right.
I didn't know. Listen, I had all these, and we're going to go over all of them, and we would it just would let it go until it exploded.
Correct. You sweep it under the rug for long enough and you hope it fixes itself.
It was.
A lot of times it doesn't, though, so sure.
And what's your passion with this, Paul? Like, what made you do all this? I mean, it's a lot of books and time, I can imagine.
There's a passion to it. It's the right word that you're using, Dave. For me, I love teaching. Teaching was always my thing. And so whether I teach at UCLA Extension in the School of Business and Management, and that kind of keeps me happy. But the writing was a great way to teach. And so much of this stuff misses awareness. They don't teach this in the MBA programs. Even in a top 10 school, you don't learn about leadership in the trenches. And I saw that gap. And I thought, you know what? I want to fill that gap with these books. And notice a lot of them have the numbers at the beginning, right? 101 this or 2,600 that. The publisher was the one who said, Paul, those number books tend to sell. So I said, okay, I'm good with numbers. But it's the way I like to use a book, Dave. I don't want to start on page 1 and get to page 340 before I can figure out what to do with it. I just tell me the problem, go to page 72, and bingo, I need what I need when I need it. So that's I wrote the books for myself, to tell you the truth. I've used them as a practitioner my whole career.
I'll tell you, and when you said about writing, I'm going to keep going back to this one, but I like on the majority of the books how you give the scenario, because I was in those positions when, let's just say, some of the sexual harassment, the cat calls. I had one girl, they were arguing about cat calls and body language, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know anything until things started to happen. But what I like about your books is you give 2 scenarios. The good part, what can go on, and then what to expect, you could expect afterwards.
Yeah. And the biggest compliment I can get is when people say, Paul, it's uncanny. It's like you were a fly on the wall. It played out just like that. And you know what? That's really cool. That's why I wrote it. People are people. They respond a certain way under certain circumstances. So, you do human resources for 3 decades. You start to be able to project certain types of patterns that are going to happen. It doesn't mean they're always going to hit exactly, but you know what? The truth of the matter is a lot of times they get pretty darn close. So if that particular book, Dave, at least I don't tell people use these exact words. I would never be so arrogant to think that, but they can go through the conversation in their head. They can prepare for it. Granted, it's going to deviate somewhat, but at the same time, if 80% of it's probably hitting true, they're going to feel a lot more confident about the conversation they're about to have with somebody. So.
It is. Tuvi asked, how did you learn how to write? Any advice to someone who's looking to improve?
Yeah, thank you. Write to the how, not to the what. Everyone knows what to do. They don't know how to do it. If you can teach them the how, that's really where the value is. So for my books, they've had a really good shelf life, knock on wood. But the reality is there's no other book out there that does that. When I wrote the book, Dave, the 101 sample write-ups for documenting employee performance problems, right. I was a one-person employee and labor relations department at the company where I was at the time. And you keep having to write these things up. And sooner or later, I thought, you know what, just pull out the old ones, change the facts around, but the rest of it is going to be the same. The expectations, the consequences. And all of a sudden, one day I thought, there's a book in here because a lot of people who don't learn employee relations, even HR people don't necessarily know the employee relations piece.
Right.
You got to make them be able to document really, really well. And again, the flattering comment on that is someone who says, you know what, Paul, I'm not particularly a good writer. I don't even like doing this employee relations stuff, but I put together some documentation and our outside counsel, our defense lawyer said, whoa, you did a great job with this piece of documentation. And it's like, that kind of gives me the approval that I need to know that, you know, it's working the way it's supposed to.
And that's what it is. Because I had some feedback, negative, when I did the show. People messaged me, I would never have said that, said this. And I said, you know what? Was there some things, and you even said it, is everybody going to go right towards that wording? And I said, no. I said, I didn't agree with not all of it, but you know what it did? It started the conversation.
Correct. And to your point, you know, Dave, what's so funny is the topic is really going to drive a lot of the conversation. So sometimes people will write on, you know, you always look on Amazon as an author. Do they like my book? You know, that kind of thing. And some people say, oh, he's way too nice. This will never work. And then some people write, oh, he's so mean. He just again, I get that. If you pick the book up and you look at number 17 versus number 84,
right,
it may have a different tone to it. But if in number 84, the guy had just stolen from the company, it's a little bit different than if they have a tardiness problem. So you know what I mean? Sometimes it is going to feel a little more heavy-handed, and sometimes it's going to feel more like coaching and not so disciplinary. And that's the balance it's supposed to be depending on the circumstance.
Yeah, I have Steve here. Tough conversations take experience and emotional intelligence. I found many of my new managers lack the experience part. A playbook can replace the lack of experience. Every new manager needs a new playbook. And
Steve, you said it. I totally agree. And again, if there was another source where they can get this information kind of funneled in, you know, go for it. But there's not a lot of opportunity to take managers and give them 30 years of HR experience, because most of them are not in HR and most of them haven't been doing it for 3 decades because they're not as old as I am. So when you put it together, that was kind of the logic behind the writing.
But like samples, Steve and Tuvi and all of us, we're all really good colleagues and we always ask each other questions and stuff. But when you said that about the book, I feel like in logistics and around this area that supervisors and even recruiters, as we are, we're like HR now. You have your HR department, they're stretched so thin. Right. Maybe there's like 3,000 or 4,000 to 5,000 people or 1,000, you know what I mean? But you as a recruiter need to know this. It's changed.
Yeah. So the funny thing too is, and here is the interest to me. It's funny, you hit the nail on the head, Dave. So for me, human resources is a department. Human resources is a function. But it totally aligns with the organizational culture, because you oftentimes think of, is it a kind HR department? Do they care in HR? That more than other departments tends to set the tone for the company. But the other thing is every manager has an HR hat because every manager has a leadership hat.
Yes.
These books aren't about HR. These books may be written for HR people, but that was never the primary intended audience. This was all my books are for general operational frontline leaders, because it's all about leadership in one form or another. And
that makes, the way you defined it to me that way, it makes common sense, because again, we run into this stuff now, and I believe some of the newer managers now, I'm experienced, so I say when somebody's new, I wish they should give out something more, some more training. I believe that there's a lack of it, And I think it needs to turn around, because HR to us, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it, but HR still scares the living hell out of it. HR does not come out to you and say, Dave, come on in the office, because every single time it's never been, you're doing a good job. Right. But I've learned, and I believe it needs to kind of get back to that, because not scary, but for them to help people, not have that scared feeling of this, of HR.
So I wasn't in HR my whole life. This is why this is so funny. I started my first 6 years working for a contingency recruiting firm. So I learned about being a sales guy on the front line. I didn't want to hear from HR either, because those folks scared me too.
Hell no.
but the reality, to your point, is everyone does have to have this leadership piece, and it isn't being trained. Right. It's missing awareness. Where we're at a point in society, honestly, with all the digital this and that and social media and we've lost the ability to sit around the campfire and pass the wisdom down from the elders to the newer generation. We're not talking enough. We're not communicating enough. The idea of the book was, do the book of the month club, but sit there. You don't have to agree with my books. You don't have to agree with any book, but see if you can pull nuggets out of these books that you can use on a practical basis in your workplace. Right. That's really what the key is. It gives you something to talk about. Do you agree? Do you disagree? One of my new books coming out next year with this new Paul Falcone Workplace Leadership Series is on workplace ethics.
Right.
I'm like, there are no books out there on workplace ethics. And we need to be talking about that again. And so that's kind of the theory behind all of my writing. I think sharing that stuff and passing along the wisdom and the experience speeds up the learning curve and makes it more interesting, for Pete's sake. Everyone wants that kind of professional and career development.
And that's one of my questions, was the social media. Compared to years ago and now, what kind of problems does that bring to HR? And what do you see maybe in a couple more years as it's like you said, it's just constantly new things over and over.
Yeah, on a practical basis, it's not as bad as you think. I mean, we do find situations where people are sharing things, employees share things on social media, and then it comes to the attention of a coworker who then brings it to human resources. Can we act on it? I prefer not to if I don't have to, but sometimes it can be concrete and it can be pretty compelling. So there's a privacy balance, but at the same time, what you put on social media as an employee, that's for the whole world to see. And a company may stumble upon it, even if they're not necessarily looking for it. And the way it usually comes to me on a practical basis is the coworkers. They're the ones who say, hey, Paul, look what's happening over here. You need to know about this. So you have to be kind of cautious with it.
No, I agree that no one is born a natural leader. Luckily, leadership is a set of skills that can be learned. Steve's a good friend. He's a recruiter, VP over at Utah for staffing, and we talk all the time, all the different things that go on. And I always worry, I'm being honest, because I'm too honest. Like, even with my work of employment, when I left, closed the company I had, is what can I say and what can't I say on social media? Like, even doing a podcast, I say to myself, well, I'm just being myself, and with everything going on nowadays with that, that's what I wonder whether some people worry about that in HR. Yeah.
I mean, that's a great question. We do have to be a little more cautious these days. I hate to say it, but you know what? The idea of letting your hat down or letting your hair down, whatever we want to say, among a group of friends is one thing. Another thing when it's on a podcast that the whole world can see. And people can be very sensitive these days if you haven't noticed. So again, that sense of awareness, a greater sense of an awareness. The person who called in earlier called it emotional intelligence. Right. It really is what it is. It's a heightened sense of awareness about the perception that you may be creating in some other's eyes at some given time. And so I think that's in the book, in the 101 Tough Conversations, I always talk about the importance of the word perception and holding people accountable for their own perception management. People aren't mad. Perception isn't right or wrong. It's like feelings. I mean, it just is. It is what it is. Yet at the same time, if you hold people accountable for the perception that they may be creating that they may not be aware of, all of a sudden they really appreciate that you're taking the time to coach them through that. And that's how you become someone's favorite boss, because you can share those insights with them that may otherwise miss awareness.
I shake my head sometimes because when I've been at some companies and I'm like, oh boy, what you're doing, what you're saying, I just... don't say that. Don't do it. Don't do it.
You can tell. Yeah.
It is
going in the wrong direction.
It is, because one of the things I want to tell you, I like how you dedicated to your mother, Dorothy. And I like what you said. Teach me to listen openly, judge fairly, and always look for the best in others. I wish a lot of that would be in some of the companies that you hear, because I get a lot of the candidates They come and everybody says nowadays, well, you're just a number. They don't care. Supervisors don't care. And when you put that in there, I really enjoyed that. That's something nice.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your acknowledging that. One quick thing on that, Dave, which is interesting. So I did a presentation in Vietnam
Right.
2 months ago, but it wasn't in Vietnam. It was via Zoom. But it's so nice that Zoom opens up the whole world. The problem they were facing, they wanted me to focus on Gen Z retention in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, which are basically high-tech hubs. Now, this is the 25 and under crowd. And what they're saying is, Paul, we can't get them to stay a year. They're gone within 8 to 10 months. And the reason is they learn the job within 6 months, and then they start looking for something new. What do we do? And the reality becomes the managers aren't investing time in the new hires because they know the new hires are going to be gone so quickly. Why bother? And now you're spiraling out of control. The reality is you got to put that human element back in the relationship. What's going to keep someone, tied to the company is that relationship with their frontline leader. Their boss makes all the difference. The boss has to do the investing, but as a boss, you have to know how to set it up for success.
Right.
It's one thing to care. It's another thing to know how do you structure your conversations with employees when it comes to employee development, professional development, career development, all this kind of stuff, where people can really engage. The final thought on this is I always tell people, motivation is not your job as a manager. You don't have to motivate anyone because it's internal. I can't motivate you any more than you can motivate me. But as a manager, you are responsible for creating an environment where people can motivate themselves. And my books have always been like, okay, here's how you do it. This is what gets your people. But just make space, set up the question, make space for them to kind of give their input. But the career development will primarily come from them because each person has a different set of expectations.
And that's what I like in the book when you said that is I enjoyed the part of it's just those first few words when you start that meeting. Listen, my wording isn't as good as some people, but I wish I would. Now that I know, I'm going to start some of them off that way because it does set the tone.
It sets the
your
tone.
Body language. You're writing about your body language, that person's language. You're looking at them, and it can go two ways. And that's what I really got out of this is to look at the wording, and I think prepare more before your meeting.
Right. But to have a tool to help you prepare, because this isn't easy. Yes. I mean, honestly, Dave, when you think about it, the way I've written the 101 Tough Conversations and the 101 Sample Write-Ups, they're sister books. One talks about the documentation piece and one teaches the verbal piece that hopefully gets you to a point where you don't need the documentation. But you're talking about performance issues, conduct issues, attendance issues. I mean, it's such a broad swath of problems that managers face on a day-to-day basis. For the most part, they don't have anywhere to turn. No. They can go to their manager on a one-off basis, but the truth is you've really got to give them the full body, the full breadth of what they're going to face in the trenches. So it helps them define themselves. It helps them feel more, confident in what they're doing. And again, that's one of the big goals to the writing.
In there, because I like how you put in there your own branding, and that really shows me a lot because it is everybody's different on the way they approach everything. And what I learned from it is you've set up when you have a group of people and they're just they're not as listening to you or they're saying things, and if you don't, I learned from this, if you don't really confront that and learn how to do it afterwards, that's tough.
Yeah, the how is the key. Everyone knows what to do. Paul, you should motivate your team better. Paul, you need to ask more questions in the interview process. It's like, well, thanks. But most managers don't have a lot of critical mass. There's no meat on the bones. After about 15 minutes, they're kind of done. And it's like, wait a second, you can't hire based on likability. You have to hire based on compatibility. Try some of these questions. And my argument has always been, Dave, look, I'm not asking you to knock the house down. Just swap out some of the bricks in the foundation. Try it. It's evolution more than revolution. Do you know what I mean? But
no, it makes
that's
sense.
how you bring yourself forward as a leader in corporate America. I think it's just really trying new things and seeing what you can incorporate and make your own.
And that makes sense because when you said about going on, when I still got 4 more books to get, but when you've written them, when I said, look, you figure you're interviewing the person, you're doing, well, I should say hiring and firing, but if you think about it, even on the effective performance reviews, when I was looking at some of this, I wanted to bring up like reviews. I think they're a thing of the past somewhat. We don't really get reviewed, and I've never been reviewed so much in a company. It's either you're too busy, people are too busy. And I believe you should have take that time with an employee on personal level, but I know how their HR is just so many people to look for.
Yeah, the performance review process is still so problematic. When I was writing for the American Management Association at the time, and they wanted me to write that book on the 2,600 phrases, and I thought, I don't even want to get in the performance review space because it's so controversial. I don't want people throwing eggs at the parade. As it turns out, that 2,600 phrases book, knock on wood, is my bestseller times 5.
Yeah.
It's done so well. But the reality is this, and this is how I explain it to people. If you don't get performance reviews, your employees are going to come to me in HR and they're going to complain. I never get any feedback. I never get any recognition. The only way I know I'm doing a good job here is I'm still on the payroll. Okay.
That hit it right there.
That standard is kind of pretty well known out there. A very, very simple fix to this. Again, I'm a pretty practical guy. I'm not a real theoretical kind of person. I tell my employees that their annual review happens 4 times a year, and they're responsible for the whole thing. The quarterly meetings that we have, they prepare for. They give me all the documentation, the bells and the whistles about how they're doing doing towards goals, what they need towards professional and career development, how I can help and coach and mentor them. All I have to do is make the space for it and step out of the way. But I tell them the annual review is not done once a year. It's really done 4 times a year because those quarterly meetings are critical to me. And the final thought I'll say here is, and again, people will not necessarily agree with me on this. I tell my employees, I want you to codify and quantify your achievements in terms of, increasing revenue, decreasing costs, saving time, put percentages, put dollars on it, because my goal is to help you build your resume. And my goal is to help you build your LinkedIn profile. And I'll help you with those anytime you want it. But you've got to kind of measure that stuff incrementally. It's not a one time a year and all the balloons go off. Over. We've got to kind of keep focused on that. And people are like, you tell your employees that you'll help them with their resume? And I'm like, of course. And you know what? I've never had much turnover on my teams throughout my career. Because when people feel like they've got a boss who's got their backs, they're not going to leave for 15% somewhere else, 20%. No. That doesn't mean enough. It's like, you're not going to get this kind of feedback elsewhere. And I want to stay in this shop. And that's been my experience. So I just think it's kind of practical horse sense.
And that makes sense. Even more worse than not receiving a performance review is one without substance or that brings issues to the forefront that go on. And we talk about this all the time. And why should you be told later, like especially if you're doing something wrong or not wrong, but nobody's leading you. Nobody's telling you anything.
Yeah. And if there's surprises in the performance review, that's the manager's bad. There should be no surprises in the performance review, but think about it. If you're making the space as a manager for your employees to meet with you every quarter, to self-assess, to say how they're doing, quantifying their achievements, and having these career discussions with them based on what their particular needs are. Listen, I book 30 minutes. It usually takes 20 minutes with my direct reports. But one of the top reasons people leave companies is they say, no opportunity for growth and, no sense of recognition and achievement for what I'm doing. That gets fixed very, very easily by allowing your employees. I don't book the time. I tell them, you book the time on my calendar. This is your meeting. I'm here to help and coach, but you have to be the one to set it up. They'll do all the work. This is horse sense. It's so simple. Yet at the same time, it misses awareness out there a lot. And I've worked for some really good companies. And to your point, if you give the message, I'm not giving you a performance review, Dave. It gives the message, I really don't value you all that much, Dave. So just keep coming to work every day and do your thing. But don't expect much from me because I'm busy doing my own job. I just think that's a missed opportunity.
It is because leaders. I mean, even now, I'm still growing all the time. I hear something all the time different. I thought I've seen it, and I think everybody says, wow, that's something new, But the number one issue is, and I still going back to, versus years ago, Paul, how do you look at, say, for an logistics company, you got 700-800 employees, and you got 5 HR. How? And 3 supervisors on each shift. There's no voice unless they give it, I think, in a way, because you can't talk to everybody. There's no way.
Yeah, I get it. But what I'll also say is this, the teaching piece. And again, I understand, Dave, that this is the part that I like, right? So this is kind of my natural. You got to delegate. You've got to delegate to your team members and push that responsibility back where it belongs. Again,
Right.
if the meeting is, it's up to me as the chief human resources officer to have each one of my direct reports come in so
Right.
I can tell them what they need to do for their professional development. That's silly. Everyone knows what they want. Some want a rotational assignment. Some want to go overseas. Some want to do this. Some want to do that. You tell me and I'll help you get there. The fear is, well, Paul, if you ask the question and you can't fulfill it, they're all going to be demotivated. And the answer to that is no, that's not true. I will help them as much as I can, but there's realistic budgets and other limitations. If I can't do it, we'll try something else. Maybe it's a course they have to take or something else, but you've got to ask. Don't lose your good people and find out in the exit interview, well, they felt that they were neglected in that role. That's a miss on management's part, especially in these days when it's so hard to, keep good people. You need to be having these discussions with them ongoing.
And how do you see the difference between evolving from, say, 15 years ago to, say, 10 years from now? What do you see in that field? Like, because you've been experienced years ago, now you're changing and evolving yourself. Is it still learning for you?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the cool part. Understand something, and this is going to sound, because of all the change, that creates the opportunity. I mean, for me as a writer, a lot of my articles now that I write for HR Magazine are all about COVID. This didn't exist a couple of years ago. We didn't know what COVID was. We also didn't know what Zoom was. But, you can talk about all these new tools and putting the energy out there for remote workers. And how do you develop a remote working team and keep them motivated so they don't feel isolated, but they also aren't taking advantage of being remote? There's all these concerns that people have, and I get it. The answer to your question is it will find us. Yeah. And when it does, we'll figure out what the problem is at that time. But what I talk about is if you have a performance appraisal template in your company, you need to create one specifically for the COVID era, or at least add a category that talks about agility, ability to change, and being receptive to new ideas and innovative ideas and thoughts. That's critical. That's the skill of the future. And also the ability to either work remotely or lead remote teams. You've got to amend that template is not supposed to be passed down from generation to generation to generation. The performance review template should change every few years at least to reflect the company's changes in times and changes in needs. So that's another one of my books.
Well, when I just got this one, I'm like, I told my wife, I said, I think this one's going to take me a little time.
That'll take some time.
But it does give you some great, I can see utilizing some of this, even on my own. Listen, I know the companies have certain ones, but there's some things in here that I can just learn from it, of how to do a meeting, how to just do it properly. And that's what I like about that one. I wanted to ask you, progressive discipline, you had some things in about there. Mm-hmm. I think that is missing so much because I always feel I hear a lot of people all the time, well, you don't know it's broken until you fix it. Like, why are you letting a guy that's got 10 years and he's never been written up? And all of a sudden you make a decision like that. I mean, it's coming from somewhere, but they're the kind of things that I believe if that's what you're saying about the progressive discipline, there has to be steps and procedures. If you don't do it, it just spins it out of control.
Yeah, there's a legal exposure to it, right? Because if you have a wrongful termination lawsuit coming your way, that's what plaintiff attorneys will use to get their foot in the door. What they're really after is the punitive damages claims that they'll get under discrimination, harassment, retaliation, and all that stuff. So you have to be careful about the wrongful termination piece. The other part of it is, look, you got to hold your people accountable. That's part of the gig. And so many managers, as we said very early on in this show, they will sweep it under the rug and hope it fixes itself. Yeah. Now, I'm not naive. Sometimes it does. I do the same. We're all human beings. Yeah. But you know what? The other 99% of the time, when it doesn't, you have to know how to step in, and it has to be a constructive step in. It can't be judgmental. It needs to come from observation. It needs to come from a coaching and mentoring standpoint. But to talk to someone and say, Dave, I understand that you think everyone else is being too sensitive and that this is just your personality. But the truth of the matter is, I've got to hold you accountable for your own perception management, just as I do myself. I have to create a friendly and inclusive work environment, and you don't get a pass on that just because you feel like other people are being too sensitive. So let's talk about how we can raise that awareness level so you don't run into this stumbling block again.
And
That's a verbal conversation that never reaches the level of discipline. And if it has to reach the level of discipline, you could point back to the fact that you've already coached the person and tried to help them through it. So.
And that's what I believe. That's what I've learned. I've learned, again, when you were saying nip it in the bud, I try to go right after it right away. Because if you don't, like, for example, if people, I like the one part, like now with tattoos, dressing, the way that people dress, bullying, foul language, email, everything that you have in there. If you don't stop some of that, I've been in that meeting to where all of a sudden, well, I told Dave, and this was 8 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
There are the kind of things that's why my stomach would drop, because some of this is so true. It was like, oh, I shouldn't. It was my fault as a leader. It was my fault in a way because I didn't confront it. I didn't want to confront it.
Yeah, and it's hard, Dave. Look, I'm a human being. It's easier for me to coach other people's employees than to coach my own, because my own, it's hard. We work side by side every day. I totally have empathy for people saying they don't want to do this. It's too painful. Right. But what I'll also say too is there's an easier way to do it than we're making it. The say nothing explosion, straw breaks the camel's back, I want him fired. Okay, that's just drama. That's just noise. Yeah. Okay, but the reality is, even if it's not that extreme, how do you teach the managers to intervene so that they feel comfortable doing it in a constructive way and it doesn't feel judgmental? It's not that hard, but you do have to practice a little bit the phraseology that you use, the intro. Right. Certain things like why is not a good word. Why did you do that? What were you thinking? Okay, that ain't going to help, right? Because that makes people defensive.
Right.
You've got to find a way to make people look internal for the solution. And it can happen if you help raise your team's awareness. I differentiate between anger and guilt. And I don't mean guilt in the old sense, but the truth is anger is external. If I'm angry at you, I'm accepting zero responsibility. It's all your fault. But the guilt sense, in a healthy sense, is when someone goes inside and they say, oh, Paul, if I raised my voice in that meeting and I offended you, I didn't mean to. I'm sorry about that. I wasn't angry at you. I think it just came out. Soon as they start doing that and they can assume partial responsibility for a problem gone wrong, won't be a problem anymore. But you do have to engage, and you can do it in a very soft manner, in a respectful manner, yet at the same time have high standards for accountability.
Well, I think I've got like 15 of them all ready to go. You know, because listen, like you said, if you're not trained on it, I always think it comes down from the management, from our leaderships, because if I feel that I didn't give them the tools, did I give that person I was let go 10 years? Why? Did he not know? Did she not know this? Did you tell them? And that's where I liked how you talked about there. The one other, when you said about difficult conversations, it brought me up to, I was at Johnson & Johnson. We had a very diverse work culture, and everybody would bring certain foods in from all around the world, right? It's all cool. Around. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then some employees would come to me and complain about odor of food or people. No, and I was like, oh, man, I would let it go. And I'd just be like, well, you know, everybody's food smells different. But then there was some things in there that reminded me that they might have some kind of medical problem, right? I mean, you don't assume right away. Mm-hmm. You know, if somebody's saying about body odor or stuff like that you put in the book, it was the way you brought it back out to them, made them comfortable, because I had to have that person in that office. And I'm like, I was young. I'm like, how am I going to say this? I just said, listen, I don't know what else to tell you, but, you know, and I don't think that was a good way, but I didn't know.
Well, you just throw it out there because you don't know. To your point, how do you do this? There's no course on it. You can't take a course on like workplace etiquette. They don't have that for how to deal with subordinates who have, you know, conduct issues or wherever it happens to be. I'll tell you, for me, again, the logic is, you know, see what the problem is, see what's do it works. But where I was blessed a little bit is I was always the peacemaker. Even as a kid in my family, I was the peacemaker for my parents, my brother, my sister. I was able to take that and use it in the workplace, and it worked well. And people would always say, you know what, Paul, even though that was a tough meeting, I'm glad you were leading it. And I felt very comfortable in there, at least as comfortable as I can be under the circumstances. And when you look at that and say, yeah, but wait, this is a teachable art. Yeah. This is not something that you have to start from scratch every time. There's some stuff out there that pulls us all together. We're human beings. Right. But how do you capitalize on those? And again, I'm not sitting here saying, oh, I'm a genius because I figured it out. I'm just saying, you do this for 30 years, you start to figure out how people will they're predictable trends, patterns, responses, and then you can move towards that and you can teach it. It is actually a teachable art form.
It is. And I have a couple more questions for you. I want to ask you. So these two, whenever I do shows, get the most reviews. I swear, the views of it, these two.
The tough conversations in the hiring,
Yep, and hiring and firing.
Mm-hmm.
You hold this up, the book that you have here, and what I like about this one is you put more, it's more educational. You put it a lot in there when you read it. It's just giving you a lot of like questions, answer. Question answers. But
yeah,
that's my favorite. But when you hold this up, this words and that words are the top shows that I could ever do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they're controversial. And they hit a chord with a lot of people, Dave. And it's like, hiring and fire. Wait a second. On one side of that equation or the other,
yep,
something probably happened to me in my career and you're just magnetized towards it. So I get that.
It is. And if you had to give advice to, to employees, what would you tell employees if they're having problems, if they're having issues and they're afraid to? I always say, go to HR. Everybody thinks HR is your enemy. And they're not.
Well, HR is your enemy because you associate it with, if I hear from HR, I'm in trouble.
Right.
But HR is your ally when you need something in the people space, the leadership space, or just something that goes beyond typically workplace issues, like maybe an employee assistance program, referral, or something along those lines. The best advice I've always given to people is this: read. Raise your level of self-awareness about how you're coming across to others. Think about the brand that you want to create as you move forward in your career. I mean, it is literally that simple. When people describe Paul Falcone, what are the 3 adjectives that come to mind quick? And I said, you don't, well, and I tell them, you don't have to answer me, but I want you to take this as a homework assignment. If it's a leader, the question I'll typically ask, Dave, is would you want to work for you?
Right.
And they're like, I don't, that's a tough question. I mean, sometimes I don't know. So,
you had me stop there because I don't know if I would. I don't.
Well, it's fine, but that's the response you'll usually get. It's like, well, I mean, even when you have someone who's kind of acting outside, the bounds, and they're like, well, everyone else needs to figure out my personality because that's just my personality. The question is, if everyone followed your lead, if everyone in this company followed your lead, would you be happy with where you took them?
It is, because when I look at this here, and Kenny and Steve and Bill and Chris and everybody here, we've all talked with this through our shows. This is what you're saying right here. And everybody's got their difference. Would I work for Steve? Would I work for Bill? He does trades. And there's so much, just like what you said there.
Yeah. And again, the goal is to simplify it. Honestly, keep it simple. The 2 things about my writing, interestingly enough, were, number 1, I wanted to always teach the how, because I know that people know the why.
I like that.
And the second issue for me, Dave, there's a little element of spirituality in my writing, in the sense where there's a selflessness, there's an otherness. I like servant leadership. If you ever read the Robert Greenleaf piece in 1970, called it The Servant Leader. It's 50 years old. It's more relevant now than it's ever been. And the idea, what you want for yourself, give to another. When in doubt, err on the side of compassion. I can weave that stuff into my writing. And I think it calms people down because they realize you actually can be a nice person and still be very effective as a leader. You don't have to be mean. You don't have to be, you can actually be pretty cool. And this comes together for you. And again, I say, knock on wood, it happened well for me. So, But it is a teachable gift. This isn't something that you're either born with or you're not. This is something that you can acquire if it's important to you. But if you do it once and you kind of latch on to these new ideas and help reinvent yourself, this is good for the rest of your career. I mean, knowing how to build strong teams, turn around teams, build trust in the people you work with. I mean, that's a gift that you're giving forward. Right. And in all my books, I always say, leadership is the greatest gift the workplace offers, because it gives you a chance to touch other people's lives, pay things forward, make them better, stronger people. I mean, what more could you ask? It's a beautiful thing. It
is. And we know, like I want to show everybody, this is a great one. I'm only halfway through with this. I'm done with this one. The 96 great interview questions. I haven't got to this one because I got all two more today. I'm looking through this, and I think this is going to be a great one for myself, because you can, unless they're set, everybody's different about their interview questions. It doesn't seem to be just basic. The basic ones I'm tired of, in a way. You know,
I agree.
what was the hardest part about leaving your job? I mean, anything.
Yeah.
But here I was looking through, I was like, wow, there's a lot of different things you have in this one.
Well, again, I had done the search practice before I got into the human resources corporate recruitment. So I kind of saw both sides of the desk. But let me give a quick example. People don't know how to open up an interview. The opener is probably one of the most important things that you can do because it's your chance to build trust.
Right.
And so when you talk to people about, tell me what's important to you at this point in your career in terms of your next job, your next company, right? If you were to accept a position right now with us, based on your understanding of it, how would it help you build your resume and your LinkedIn profile? And another way I ask it is, if you were to take this job with us right now, how would you explain this decision to a prospective employer 3 to 5 years from now? In other words, how would this help you build your resume over time? What you're doing is you're moving the professional development paradigm to the pre-employment stage. And candidates love this. They don't get this very often. Now, managers say, well, I don't have the time. And I say, yeah, you actually do have the time. This only takes 5 minutes. And get rid of some of those questions about if you could be a fish, which fish would you be? You don't need those. Get rid of those questions.
I do. And I try to, I'm very honest, too honest sometimes, but it's what you need to learn now. I mean, like you said, I like how you just said, build the person up. You know, if she leaves in 2 to 3 years, you know, if you've made them a better person, because I bet when they ask me, like, if you ask me what was my favorite boss, I have easy on top 5. What's your worst? And that's even easier, you know, but
yes, we've all had that.
Yeah. And they're easy though. But like you said, I can tell you who I enjoyed 15 years ago, who I didn't. And my prior boss is the one who gave me this. I give her the credit for me doing a podcast or doing live videos before I did LinkedIn Live. I just did a lot of interviews and I enjoyed it. And then I found out, I was like, you know what? I learned from all this. Right. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's the fun. I always go back to Maya Angelou, the US poet, who basically said, people may not remember what you did. They may not remember what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. Yeah. And that always stuck with me. That's always part of my books. That's always part of my writing. That's the connection that leadership gives you. And I've run into people who I haven't seen them in 20 years. I could barely remember who they are. Right. And they're like, Paul, I'm still like WWPD. What would Paul do? You influenced me so much. You helped me. You know what? You can't put a dollar on that. I mean, that is the greatest gift that the workplace offers. And it's a beautiful thing to see.
It is, because I admit, you know, you can see I'm passionate about your book. So when you saw that, I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to put at Paul. I didn't know. I was like, he responded. I was like, wow. I said, but you changed me, because now it opened my eyes. So that's one person, but you don't know what you do until you wrote this. You didn't know that some people would take it to heart, you know,
exactly.
And that's what it is. But I can't thank you enough. And I do want to tell everybody, Amazon, definitely Amazon. I said that. Uh-huh. Amazon. These 3 were at Amazon Today Prime. So, you know, but this one, again, I'm looking forward to. I really want to learn from this one here. But I can't thank you enough for coming on, Paul, and taking the time, you know.
Dave, this is the best interview I've ever had in my whole life. It has been so flattering for me. Anything you ever want, I'm back on your show in a heartbeat, because it has been so complimentary and flattering, and I thank you for that.
And I appreciate it, because it has changed me, and it's made me look. Going in the next day, I'm like, all right, don't blow up. You just bring them in the meeting and say, hey, you know how that makes me feel? I like that wording. Do you know how that makes me feel? And I'm going to try to adapt that more often, because that kind of set that tone of those questions you don't want to ask, because you said it. You constantly said it. How do you makes me feel?
Right.
You know, so, but I want to thank you, and everybody, please, you know, go to Amazon, PM Paul. I'm going to put on the website, because you have your website.
Great. Thank you.
And how many more books do you have coming out?
5 more in the new year. 5 more.
Wow.
It's HarperCollins, and it's called the Paul Falcone Workplace Leadership Series. And I said, wait, my name is the title? And they said, yes. I said, I'm all in. So it was really exciting. So I did most of that writing through COVID. So that'll be out in the spring.
That is awesome. All right, Paul, thanks so much. And I'm going to talk to you in a minute right after this. So everybody have a great night, and talk to you soon. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Dave. My pleasure. Thank you.